Dad is a loser. I don't want your last name. My son yelled to impress my ex-wife and her rich new husband. So I handed him a name renunciation form. He signed proudly, then watched his scholarship, inheritance, and place in the family vanish overnight. I don't want your last name anymore. The sentence didn't land, it detonated. Right in the middle of the solarium, surrounded by polished glassware, fresh floral arrangements, and people who thought they knew what power looked like. The room stopped. Forks hovered in midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. My son stood up, his back straight and confident, looking directly at me. Then came the second blow. My new dad says you're a loser. He's the man I look up to now. Laughter. Two of his step-cousins at the back table snorted. One of them clapped. I heard someone whisper, damn. And my ex-wife was beaming, tilting her champagne flute in my direction like it was a toast she had proposed. That rehearsed smug smile she always wore when she thought she had won something. I didn't blink, I didn't flinch. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the envelope I had brought just in case, and placed it on the table in front of Mason. Then I unscrewed my pen, placed it gently next to the paper, and slid both across the tablecloth. Okay, I said. Sign here, son. No theatrics, no scolding. I didn't ask him to reconsider. I didn't plead or try to guilt him. I just waited because I wasn't angry. I was done. He hesitated for a second, maybe two. Then he grabbed the pen and scrawled his name on the bottom like he was autographing a football. It wasn't just a name he crossed out. It was an entire history, one I had built for him silently, methodically for decades. I had held him in the delivery room. I was the one who stayed when his mother ran off to that retreat that turned into an affair in 2009. I was the one who taught him to ride a bike, who took a second job to keep him in that prep school when the markets crashed. I was the one who came home every night, dead tired, and still sat with him to practice dictation and history flashcards. But none of that mattered. Not now. Not to him anymore. And the worst part is I wasn't even surprised. Sometime between his 13th birthday and this brunch, he stopped being my son and started becoming hers. Her voice echoed in his opinions. Her vanity lived in his ambition. Even his new haircut, the one he had insisted on getting last week, was a clone of her new husband's, the tech investor with the stupidly white veneers and the laugh that sounded like a car alarm. The man who called me Jerry every time we crossed paths, even after I corrected him 3 times. Right on, Gerald, right? As if it were a joke. As if I were the joke. Mason's signature lay inked and crooked on the page, still drying. Thanks, Dad, he said, mocking the word. I mean, Gerald. I folded the paper, slipped it back into the envelope, and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I raised my glass. To Mason, I said calmly, may you get everything you just asked for. Some laughed, some winced. One of the step-cousins said, damn, in a low voice. But it didn't matter. The line had been crossed, not just with ink, but with blood. And the beautiful thing about all of this is that Mason had no idea what he had just done. None of them did. You see, there's a reason I brought a legacy waiver. Not out of spite, but because I knew. I knew the second I heard Mason start calling his stepfather Dad in front of his friends. I knew when she changed her last name back 2 weeks after the ink was dry on the divorce papers. I knew when Mason stopped answering my texts but started tagging the new family in every Instagram post. This wasn't a phase, it was a campaign. And the brunch, that was their little victory parade. But what they didn't know and would never guess is that I've spent 40 years building not just a legacy, but a system, a legal framework, a fortress disguised as a garden. All of it tied to a single thread, the name. You carry the name, you carry the key, you leave the name, the door locks behind you forever. And now, thanks to that little performance, the door had just slammed shut. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and left the brunch without dessert. By the way, if you're still listening and you're not subscribed, do me a favor and hit that button. Over 90% of you aren't, and it honestly helps more than you know. It keeps the stories going, it keeps the team fueled, and it reminds guys like me that quiet revenge still has an audience. Back at home, I poured myself a whiskey. Neat. No music, just the silence of a house finally free of echoing footsteps that never quite belonged. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I opened the safe, pulled out the family charter, and turned to clause 17.4. Mason thought he had written me out of his life. He had no idea I had just written him out of the future. The house was quiet in that way only expensive insulation and loneliness can provide. No creaks, no settling beams, just the low hum of the grandfather clock in the hall and the occasional distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I poured a second glass, not out of habit, but ceremony. Some moments demand a ritual. This was one of them. I took the folder out of my jacket pocket and laid it flat on the desk. Mason's signature was there, proud and defiant, almost arrogant, slanted to the left, as if he couldn't wait to be done with it. I looked at it for a long time, not because I doubted the next step, but because I wanted to remember how easily it had all crumbled. That signature wasn't symbolic. I had made sure of it when I drafted the waiver with my legal team 3 years earlier, around the time I noticed Mason using my name less and calling his new husband, the real provider, more often. I had watched from a distance as my presence became optional, then inconvenient, and finally erased. But I hadn't reacted, not publicly. Instead, I adjusted the architecture. Clause 17.4 was deliberately obscure, buried deep within the family charter. It was originally drafted by my grandfather during the Korean War. Back then it was a mechanism to disavow deserters, the literal kind. I reworked it with modern language and digital equivalents. I reincorporated it into the trust under a revision labeled Beneficiary Alignment Protocol. I picked up the landline, not the cell, the hard line. Some calls shouldn't live on cloud records. The first ring barely finished before the click. Gerald. The voice of my estate lawyer came through, alert but calm. The man has been with me through 2 audits, a federal contract dispute, and a very delicate situation involving a cousin's rehab clause. I want to initiate clause 17.4. 4, I said with immediate effect. There was a pause, a real one, not a stutter, just a beat where you could hear someone opening a file in their head. Then he exhaled. Gerald, that retroactively disinherits him. It nullifies all held allowances, education, healthcare, even the ceremonial roles. You know that. Yes, I answered looking at Mason's looping M. It's what he asked for. He didn't argue, just said, understood. I'll initiate the sequence. Would you like to notify the advisory council yourself, or shall I handle it? You handle it discreetly. I'll draft a follow-up letter for the family council. Nothing dramatic. Received. He hung up. No pleasantries, no condolences, just execution. I turned in my chair and looked at the wall where the original hand-drawn family tree hung, framed in walnut. It had been there since before Mason was born. His name, like the others, was embroidered on a golden band beneath his branch. I took it off the wall, not to destroy it. I don't destroy history, but some artifacts belong in the archives, not on display. I opened the encrypted folder on my computer and began moving Mason's beneficiary files to the inactive directory. Each click felt like a spade hitting earth. College fund revoked. Healthcare access suspended. Property succession terminated. He had walked into that brunch thinking he was scoring social media points. What he had actually done was activate a clause so old the ink on it predates Bluetooth. The beauty of clause 17.4 is not that it disinherits the person, it's that it rewrites the inheritance map. There is no appeal, no renegotiation. It locks in, and once it locks, every branch tied to that name becomes a dead limb on the legal structure. No flow of funds, no residuals, not even ceremonial invitations. Mason, unknowingly, had not just cut himself out. He had forfeited everything tied to the legal identity of that bloodline. Because that's what I spent decades building. Not a fund, not a house, a network of legacy, one that doesn't bend to mood swings or apology texts. He was out. And here's the kicker. Legally, I didn't disinherit him. He disinherited himself with a signature in public. Witnessed, voluntary. His friends even filmed it thinking it would go viral. One of them captioned it. My boy divorcing his dad at brunch. LOL. I saved it to my evidence folder. It would help if this ever got disputed. It won't, but I like backups. I closed the laptop, locked the file cabinet, turned off the light. This wasn't revenge, it was clarity. A son does not owe a father loyalty, but he should understand the value of a name before he throws it away. Mason thought he was burning a bridge. He didn't realize it was the only one that led to his future. The cascade did not begin with a phone call or a shouting match. It began with a silent update on a secure server. At exactly 9:03 in the morning, I logged into the estate management platform, a fortress built with 3-factor authentication, rotating codes, and a cold backup in a Nevada safety deposit box. My thumbprint confirmed, My retina confirmed. My passphrase. The name endures. Confirmed. I navigated to the beneficiary structure module. There was Mason Yacht Cavill status active. A single keystroke. Edit. The system prompted update beneficiary status. I selected from the drop-down menu from active to null per voluntary name Renunciation, clause 17.4. A red flag icon appeared next to his name. A warning that could not be ignored. I clicked Save. Confirmation dialog. This action cannot be undone. I entered the master override password, the one my lawyer made me memorize and never write down. I pressed enter. Done. Just like that. Mason ceased to exist within the legal universe I had built for the outside world. He was still a high school graduate with 218,000 followers and a pending admission to a state university on a legacy scholarship. But to the family trust, he was a ghost, a name that no longer matched, a non-entity. The surname clause was not performative, it was foundational. Every document tied to our estate, from land parcels to corporate voting shares, required an active alignment with the Cavill name. Mason's public renunciation, witnessed and documented, had activated the algorithmic firewall embedded in the trust's logic, and unlike people, systems don't forgive. It didn't stop at just inheritance. The cascade spread like a silent infection. The lake property, technically under a holding entity whose bylaws only allow bloodline title holders access or CEO sign-offs, his permissions revoked. The Cavill family artifacts, including grandfather's war medals and first edition law texts passed down 5 generations, marked as ineligible for transfer. The Cavill Foundation Scholarship, where Mason was next in line for a full ride, flagged and withdrawn by the trustees. The clause clearly stated reserved for descendants of name and deed. Voting rights in Cavill Holdings Incorporated. Mason had no idea, but he was slated to receive a 3.5% passive voting share on his 21st birthday. Gone, transferred back into the Legacy Reserve Fund. All automated, all airtight. Around 10:17 in the morning, the system generated a notification. You have successfully updated your estate alignment. Advisory council members will be notified. I exhaled, not in relief, but in confirmation. There was no joy in this. I wasn't celebrating a victory. I was flipping the breaker switch on a house that no longer needed to be lit. Mason thought names were a matter of ego. He didn't understand they were infrastructure. At 11:42, I got a text from the Trust's General Counsel, short, clinical, precise. Per your directive, clause 17.4 activation has propagated across all linked structures. Mason Cavill's renunciation is legally recognized as a forfeiture of rights. As of this timestamp, he holds no residual beneficiary status. His legal ID discrepancy makes him incompatible with all surname lock protocols. No further action is required unless the reversal protocol is initiated. It requires a full board vote plus unanimous approval from the family council. Unanimous. There is no such thing as unanimity when you build a structure on pride and rules. That was the point. I closed the laptop, but the work continued behind the scenes. Automated messages to the estate's external partners began to queue up. Accountants, property managers, educational liaisons, estate curators, all receiving the same silent update. Mason Cavill is no longer recognized. By 2 in the afternoon, one of the family historians had already archived his name in the non-aligned descendants section. His picture, once slated for the next printed family tree, was replaced with a placeholder, entry revoked per waiver clause. I went outside, stood in the garden, and watched the wind ripple through the hedges I had planted 20 years ago when Mason was still in diapers. I remember teaching him how to prune roses, how to tie his shoes, how to open a door with a hidden latch under the side panel. He had forgotten every lesson I gave him, but I hadn't forgotten a single safeguard. The estate, the legacy, the whole machinery of memory and wealth. I didn't build it for love, I built it to last. And that meant knowing when to close the gates, even if it meant closing them behind your own blood. The first post appeared at 7:1 in the evening. A filtered picture, of course. Mason sitting on the hood of his stepfather's Escalade with one foot up on the bumper, as if he had just won something. Caption, finally dropped the loser's last name. Feels good. All caps, 2 fist emojis, a crown. The comments came fast. Some of his school friends cheered him on with fire emojis and W wins. A few girls from his communications class chimed in with hearts, and you deserve better anyway. And then, of course, her comment, 3 red hearts. No words, just approval. I watched it all from my study, the screen casting a faint glow in my otherwise dark room. I didn't even need to scroll. The algorithm brought it to me. I was still tagged in some of the older family photos, the ones they hadn't scrubbed from their timeline yet. We were still technically connected, but emotionally. That bridge had been ashes for days. 2 hours later, the second post arrived. A staged candid of Mason walking alongside his stepfather on a golf course. Identical polos, the same short haircut, matching smug smiles, like a beer commercial gone wrong. The caption was a masterclass in unearned arrogance, proud to take his last name soon. Respect is earned. Again, the same storm of support, but underneath, between the cheers and the emojis, was something else, something colder. A distant cousin wrote, "Is this the same guy who missed your birthday 3 years in a row?" Another older relative commented simply, "Wow." No punctuation, just wow. You could feel the unease starting to seep in like water under a door, but Mason didn't notice or didn't care. Maybe both. He was too busy basking in his own declaration. He thought this was the moment he finally stepped out of my shadow. He had no idea he had just stepped off a cliff. What Mason didn't know, what he couldn't know, is that those same posts were now being tagged, archived, and time-stamped on the estate's legal server under the header. Proof of voluntary renunciation. Social affirmation. It sounds bureaucratic, I know, but they weren't just digital tantrums, they were legal receipts. The clause we activated wasn't just paper. It required a demonstrable public confirmation of the name renunciation for the separation to be airtight under a trust audit. And Mason, bless his proud little heart, had just given us 2 in less than 24 hours, voluntary, public, celebrated. His stepfather even shared it on his LinkedIn with some screed about merging families through love and leadership. It was at that moment I realized I didn't even feel any resentment for the guy. He wasn't a threat, just a mirror, one that Mason looked into and mistook for a window. Her third post came at midnight. A black and white picture of Mason as a boy, holding my hand, cropped so my face was out of the frame. Caption: Growing up is letting go of what was never real. Broken heart, sparkles. It got over 300 likes. I looked at it without emotion. Not because it didn't hurt, it did somewhere under the steel, but because it finally explained everything. This wasn't betrayal, it was a revelation. I had always suspected Mason's heart leaned toward her. Had ignored the quiet cues, the way he would roll his eyes when I mentioned the legacy, the way he never asked about the company I was grooming him for. The way he once told a friend, loud enough for me to hear, that business suits are for people who peaked at 40. What I was seeing now wasn't just rejection. It was confirmation that everything I feared he might become, he was. And he hadn't just become it. He was celebrating it. And for me that was enough, not to forgive, but to stop doubting. It's funny how people think silence equates to defeat. They post louder, they brag more, thinking they're winning some invisible point. But silence isn't surrender, it's surveillance. I screenshotted everything. Uploaded it to the legal server with hash verification. We had what we needed. Every like, every comment, every hashtag. They weren't memories anymore. They were evidence. Proof that this wasn't a mistake. It was his decision, his choice, and it was final. The first tremor hit quietly. No explosion, no grand announcement, just a small red warning banner at the top of Mason's University financial aid portal. Your scholarship eligibility has been revoked due to a change in status. Please contact your fund administrator for clarification. That's it. No explanation, no breakdown of figures, just a system notice that might as well have said, good luck. He refreshed the page 3 times, logged out and back in. Same result. The Cavill Legacy Scholarship, the one we had set up years ago as part of a structured educational trust for bloodline descendants, had vanished as if it had never existed. The portal now showed an outstanding balance of $42,800 for the upcoming semester. Mason stared at the screen, then opened a new tab and searched scholarship revocation error, as if Google could reverse what he had signed. He called the university office. Voicemail. He called the financial aid helpline. Hold music. Then nothing. By the 4th try, he was pacing the room, checking his Wi-Fi signal, as if that were the problem. As if a bad reception could cause this kind of collapse. Finally, he called his mother. It's probably a glitch, she said breezily, the clink of a wine glass in the background. These portals are a mess this time of year. I'll talk to someone. Mason was temporarily calmed because that's what ignorance is. It's a comforting drug. It numbs you right up until the scalpel cuts too deep. 3 hours later, she got the call. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered on speakerphone, still half distracted by whatever she was stirring in the kitchen. This is Deborah Cavell. A pause, then a familiar voice. Ma'am, came the measured tone of my estate lawyer. I need to speak with you about a document your son signed last week. She stiffened. Excuse me, who is this again? Michael Petros, senior counsel for the Cavell Estate and Trust. Clause 17.4 was activated by the signature. I'm calling to ensure you understand what that document entailed. There was a beat, the sound of the burner clicking off. Clause 17.4, he repeated. Voluntary name, renunciation. As per the terms of the family charter, your son's signature voided his eligibility for all financial or other benefits administered under the Cavell name. That includes the Cavell Legacy Scholarship. Wait, no, that's his college fund. It's secured. It was already approved. You can't just. With all due respect, he cut in his voice like granite. Your son's voluntary renunciation of the Cavell surname constitutes a legal disassociation from the family line, as outlined in the trust. Clause 17.44 is binding. There is no appeal process for beneficiaries who nullify their own legibility by voluntary means. I just wanted to extend the courtesy of a direct explanation before the advisory council issues the formal letter. Silence. On the other end of the line, you could almost hear the color draining from her face. You mean he's actually going through with this? It's already done, ma'am. Another silence. Then the call disconnected. She didn't hang up. She dropped the phone. Mason was nearby, piecing together what he could just from her expression. The arrogant confidence he had been wearing all week. The swagger of a boy finally free of his father's name began to crack. For the first time since that brunch. I suspect he felt something clench in the pit of his stomach. Not just fear, consequence. They had played the whole thing like a publicity stunt, like a symbolic gesture. But the trust wasn't symbolic, it was a machine. And once you pulled the wrong lever, the gears didn't grind. They turned cold, fast, irreversible. That night, Mason emailed the university, then another, then 3 more. He called again, this time leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. He even posted on a student forum asking if anyone else had lost their scholarship due to a family name issue. No replies, not even a pity like. At 2:17 in the morning, he sent me his first text in over 6 months. Hey, can we talk? I didn't answer. Not because I enjoyed the silence, but because it wasn't mine to break anymore. It belonged to the system he had voluntarily walked out of. They showed up just past noon, a mother-son duo trying to disguise their urgency as casual concern. Mason sat in the passenger seat of her leasing BMW with his arms crossed, jaw tight, aimlessly scrolling through his phone. Deborah drove as if she were late for a luncheon she wasn't invited to. Tight grip, sharp turns, no music. For once, neither of them was narrating their lives on social media. There was nothing performative about what they were about to do. The gate loomed ahead. Tall iron bars that once signified security now looked more like a verdict. Deborah pressed the call button on the keypad. No response. She tried again. Still nothing. She punched in the old gate code. The keypad flashed red. Access denied. What the hell? She muttered. Mason leaned forward, watching her key it in again, slower this time as if the numbers might respond to politeness. Same red light. She tried a second code, then a third. Each rejection felt louder than the last. Finally, she got out of the car and walked back to the speaker, pressing and holding the button. Gerald, her voice was sharp. It's me, Deborah. We need to talk nothing. She glanced over her shoulder at Mason, who now looked like he wanted to disappear into the seat. I know you're home. This is ridiculous. The gate didn't even buzz. The silence taunted her. Just then, the side gate cracked open a sliver. Not the main one. It was the old service entrance tucked away near the bushes. An elderly neighbor emerged walking a yappy little dog wearing a bandana that read, "Rescue me." Oh, hello, Deborah said quickly, her voice switching to a social tone out of reflex. Is Gerald in? We can't seem to reach him. The neighbor didn't smile. He moved. That one sentence knocked the wind out of her. What? He moved. The woman repeated, securing the dog's leash. Said he was making some changes, privacy concerns or something. He didn't say where. Mason stuck his head out of the car window. Moved as in gone. Yes. The woman shrugged. Big moving truck. Came last weekend. Quiet crew. They even took the flagpole down. The place has been empty since. Deborah blinked, trying to compute. But his whole life is here. The woman looked at her with a kind of polite pity. Not anymore. Then she walked away. Deborah stared at the house. The hedges were trimmed. The lawn still perfect, the windows newly washed, but it didn't look lived in. It looked like a show home, a museum exhibit for a family that no longer existed. Mason got out of the car and walked up to the main gate, gripping the iron bars with both hands like a teenager in a jail scene. He stared at the house. His house once. The place where he had spent holidays and summers and countless arguments over curfews and grades. Where Gerald had taught him how to sand wood in the garage. Where the old dog Klauber used to bark like hell every time the sprinklers came on. Gone all of it. There was no mail sticking out of the door, no abandoned boxes. Even the wind chimes had been taken down. He shook the gate. Nothing budged. He looked at his mother. Do you have his new number? I have a number, she muttered, scrolling through her phone, but he's not answering. Mason tried calling too, straight to voicemail. He sent another text. Please, just talk to me, please. No response. Let's go around back, Mason said, already walking. Maybe the old gate is open. It wasn't. In fact, it was gone. The back path had been sealed off with a new privacy fence, thick wood, 10 feet high, no latch from the outside. It looked expensive and permanent. While they stood there, feeling useless, a delivery van pulled up at the neighbor's driveway. The driver glanced at them, then at the gate, then back at them. Whatever he was thinking, he didn't say it. He just drove on as if they were invisible. Deborah exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. He's doing this on purpose. Mason didn't reply because deep down he knew he wasn't. This wasn't about spite. Gerald wasn't that kind of man. He didn't attack, he didn't scream, he didn't sabotage, he eliminated, he withdrew silently, completely, and left no rope to grab onto. There was no forwarding address, no assistant to plead with, no loophole to sneak through. Just a locked gate and a padlocked legacy. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. At least that's how it had been presented. A rooftop overlooking the marina, fairy lights swaying in the breeze, a catered bar humming with polite laughter and expensive wine. People mingled in khaki blazers and sundresses, talking about mergers, weddings, and private schools, as if they all belonged to the same silent club of generational insulation. Mason arrived late, shuffling behind his mother like a dog that had smelled something foul, but wasn't quite sure what it was. His shirt was rumpled, no tie, sneakers instead of dress shoes. The look of someone who used to be expected, but was now merely tolerated. Still, people nodded at him. They were polite. One offered a strained smile. A cousin waved without making eye contact. Everyone knew something had happened. They just didn't know the scale of it yet. Until the envelope arrived. It was handed to Mason by a man he didn't recognize. 50s with a pressed linen shirt and the badge of external legal counsel like a scar on his chest. He didn't say a word, just held it out as if it were a bill Mason had forgotten to pay. Mason looked at it, confused. What is this? The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. Deborah tried to intercept. Wait, who authorized? But the man had already turned away, disappearing back into the crowd like fog under a spotlight. Mason opened the envelope, pulled out the contents, and the world just stopped. First, a photocopy of the form, the same one he signed at the brunch. His signature still arrogant, still diagonal, now highlighted in red. Second, a neatly typed list, precise, emotionless, like an obituary written by a lawyer. As of date of signature, revoked, Cowbell Legacy Scholarship, revoked, bloodline voting rights in Cavell Holdings Int. Revoked, access to Cavell family lake property and land titles. Revoked, heir status under the Cavell family charter. Revoked designated beneficiary status on all Cavell trust entities. Revoked burial rights in the Cowbell family plot. Section B. Each point was like a bullet to the chest. Mason's hands trembled as he read it. At the bottom was a handwritten note, not me can ingratiated. Blood matters, but names carry the weight. You gave yours away. No signature, none was needed. Deborah's face went paper white. She looked like she was going to collapse. Her eyes darted to the bar, to the exit, to the older family members sitting near the stage, anywhere but at Mason. A hush began to fall over the group. People noticed. Someone asked, "Is that real?" Another whispered, "They've disinherited him." The groom, the to-be poor guy, tried to change the subject, toasting his fiancée. No one raised their glasses. Then, without a word, Mason's grandfather, Gerald's father, the original patriarch of the Cavils, who rarely spoke but whose presence still held the weight of a judge's gavel, stood up from his chair. He didn't say a word, didn't look at Mason, just walked across the rooftop, through the crowd, past the lights, and left no goodbyes, no nod, just a silent, permanent exit. And in that moment, Mason finally understood the difference between being kicked out of a party and being kicked out of a bloodline. He tried to joke it off. "I guess I'm free now, right?" But it came out broken, a dry, pathetic cough of a punchline that no one even pretended to find funny. People started to turn away. Conversations returned, but none of them included Mason. He became a display piece, something to glance at and then forget. Deborah stood beside him, frozen. Her hand hovered over his back, unsure whether to comfort him or protect herself. He shoved the papers back into the envelope, crinkled the corner. He didn't know what to do with it. His name was still his, technically, but not legally, not historically, not where it mattered. For the first time, Mason looked around the room and realized he wasn't part of the family anymore. He was just a guest. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to process. A big explosion, a dramatic falling out, but the real exile is quieter. It's the slow withdrawal of a warmth you didn't know was holding you. The first thing Mason noticed was the silence. Not on social media, which was still buzzing with recycled pictures of him and his stepdad, videos from the brunch, cheers, all the bravado from before, but the real silence, the kind that shows up in the notifications that don't arrive. Aunt Lotzie didn't text him after the engagement party, like she usually did with her rambling voice notes. Uncle David, who had promised to help Mason get a summer internship at his accounting firm, suddenly stopped returning calls. The same cousin who used to tag him in every dumb Family vs. Outsiders meme unfollowed him completely. At first, Mason assumed it was because of the party. Maybe the envelope delivery had just made people uncomfortable. He told himself it would blow over, that it was just the older generation being dramatic, that everyone knew family drama was theater, not law. But then he opened his email. Subject: update on the governance of Dylan Calble's startup, his second cousin. Hey Mason, hope you're doing well. After an internal review, the board has voted to restructure roles within the fund. As part of that, we've reassigned your observer position. We appreciate your energy early on and wish you the best of luck in the future. No phone call, no heads up, just deleted. The startup was small. Sure, just a family seed fund exploring green tech, but Mason had been part of it since the beginning. He helped pick the damn name. He designed the first pitch deck on his laptop his senior year of high school, and now he was just gone. No vote, no voice, no access. He forwarded the email to his mother with the subject line, "Can they even do this?" She didn't reply for 6 hours. When she finally did, it was a single word. Yes. The same day, his birthday came and went. Not a text, not a card. The year before, he had received 17 messages by noon. 2 of them from relatives he didn't even like. This year, just a comment from a few high school friends saying, "Hope it's a good one, King Crown." Nobody from the Cavill side even. The real gut punch came at dinner 3 days later when his stepfather finally broke the silence. They were eating grilled salmon, one of the few meals Mason still liked at home, and the atmosphere had been thick for days. Mason had been pacing, moody, waiting for someone to bring it up. So, he said casually, picking at his asparagus, "I guess the Cavills have really cut me off." The stepfather didn't look up, just chewed, swallowed, and then said, "Looks like it." That was it. No defense, no support, no plan, just a confirmation. He didn't say, "We'll fix it," or "They'll get over it," or even "That's tough." He just nodded, sipped his wine, and kept eating as if Mason had asked about the weather. It hit Mason like a slap because until that moment he had believed, deeply believed, that his stepfather was his backup parachute, that if the Cavills bailed, he'd have a new family system ready to catch him. But he wasn't family to them either. He was leverage, an image, a symbol in Instagram photos and family bios. And now that the weight of his Cavill name had evaporated, so had his usefulness. Over the next week, Mason tried to rebuild connections. He texted 3 cousins. Only one read it. He called his godmother, voicemail. He even tried to tag Gerald in a photo of them from 2016 with the caption, "Still proud of everything you taught me." The tag didn't stick. Gerald had either untagged himself or blocked him. He looked at his own last name. Still Cavill on paper, but hollow now. Like wearing the badge of a company that no longer exists. You can say you work there, but the key card doesn't open any doors. He finally understood what that note meant. Blood matters, but names carry the weight. Nobody was angry anymore. Nobody was yelling. They weren't punishing him. They had simply accepted that he had chosen to leave. And so they let him go. He found me pruning roses. Not metaphorically, literally. I was standing under a pergola in the northeast corner of the Aston Botanical Reserve, wearing gloves and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better decades, trimming back some overzealous climbers before they took over the trellis. The volunteer badge pinned to my shirt, the sun at my back, the clippers in my hand. I knew he was there before he spoke. That heavy, uneven footstep, that pause of someone gathering the courage to say something they hadn't rehearsed enough. "Dad," I didn't turn around. "Dad," he swallowed. "Please," I kept pruning. One snip, two. The silence forced him to fill it. I didn't think it would mean all of this. I was just angry. "Mom," she said. He stopped. He collected himself. It was a moment, just a stupid moment. Then I turned slowly. Not dramatically, just enough to face him fully. He looked older, not from the lines on his face, but from the way he stood, like someone who had aged 10 years trying to fix a disaster with tools he never learned how to use. "A stupid moment," I repeated, tilting my head. "That's what we're calling it." He looked down. "I didn't mean for it to." "You thought it didn't mean anything," I said, not angry, just clear. "That's what you meant. You thought signing your name away was just a social stunt, a rebranding, a little bit of theater for the brunch crowd." He didn't argue. "That was new. I thought I could undo it," he said. "Or fix it. You can't." I said it flatly, like telling someone they had missed the last train and the station was closed. "You didn't just break a rule, you broke the contract and the bloodline in the same breath. You said the name meant nothing and the legacy listened." He took a step forward, just one. "I didn't know you would take it this far." "I didn't take anything," I said, shaking my head. "You gave it away. I just respected your choice." He flinched as if the truth had slapped him. And then, finally, the mask cracked. "Do you even care?" he said, his eyes now wet. "Do you care that I'm here trying to fix it?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment I realized he still hadn't learned. He thought fixing this meant reversing paperwork, apologizing, hitting undo on a keyboard built on generations. "I care," I said, "but me caring doesn't mean rebuilding a bridge you burned while laughing. It means planting something new somewhere else. This land," I pointed to the trellis behind me, "won't take your roots anymore." He stared at the roses. Maybe he remembered being a boy in our backyard, cutting them for his mother on birthdays I had to remind him about. "Can I change it back?" He tried again. "The name legally." "I can. It's not about what your ID says," I cut in. "It's about what you meant, and what you meant is loud. It's documented. It's viral, and more than that, it was believed." He didn't say anything, just stood there, his mouth slightly open, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. I turned back to the roses. "There's a bench by the koi pond," I said without looking at him anymore. "It's got your great-grandmother's name on it. You won't find mine anywhere near it. Not an accident." A pause. The longest one. He didn't speak. I didn't turn back. Finally, I heard his footsteps. Not frantic, not shuffling, just leaving. No yelling, no last play. Just silent, complete distance. I made one last cut on the branch in my hand. A clean one, the kind you don't tape back together. The boardroom hadn't changed in decades. A long oak table, frosted windows, a Cavill family crest etched into the glass above the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. The same old leather chairs, one for each voting member of the estate. 12 in total, except now only 11 were occupied. Mason's chair remained untouched, not removed, not reassigned, just empty, like a scar you no longer bother to cover. No one acknowledged it. No one needed to. The silence around it had become part of the rhythm. When the chairman read the attendance list, he paused for half a second at Mason's name, skipped it without emotion, and continued. I sat at the head of the table, calm, older. Not hardened, not bitter, just clean. The kind of clean you only get after the fire has taken what it needs and left you alone in the ashes, untouched, and finally still. The meeting went quickly. Quarterly allocations, asset movements, foundation partnerships, the usual. Then they got a new business. "We have one final matter before we adjourn," said Marion, our trust director. She adjusted her glasses, though she didn't need them to read. "The new scholarship. Gerald, would you like to introduce it?" I nodded once. No speech, no preamble. "The Cavell Legacy Scholarship," I said, "will now be replaced by a merit-based scholarship under a new name, the Heritage Endowment for Namesake Descendants." There was a murmur of curiosity in the room. I could see the board members leaning forward slightly. "The eligibility criteria," I continued, "are simple. Direct descendants of the Cavell family who legally retain the Cavell surname and who have demonstrated personal and professional integrity tied to that identity." I didn't look at anyone directly. I didn't need to. Some members exchanged glances, a couple of silent nods. One of the older cousins, Todd, even let out the beginning of a slow exhale. That kind of deep breath you only take when a long, unspoken chapter finally ends. Marion held up the official letterhead for the record. "All funds previously allocated to the Cavell Legacy Scholarship have been merged into the Heritage Endowment, now held under an irrevocable trust. The first disbursement is slated for the upcoming academic cycle. Gerald will personally oversee the selection of candidates." I leaned back in my chair. No one said Mason's name once, but everyone heard it in his absence. Later, during the reception that always followed the board meetings, I stood by the windows overlooking the private garden. Someone politely asked if the new scholarship excluded adopted children. "No," I clarified. "The blood isn't always born with it," I said. "But the name must be chosen, kept, carried." I didn't stay long. As I left the room, I gave one last glance at the empty chair. No nameplate, no apology, just a silent record of a decision once made out loud that now echoed the reverse. A few days later, I signed the scholarship charter in my study. The final line read, "For those who understand that a name is not given, it is earned, and it is kept." The document now sits in the Cavell archives across from the family tree. Jan, his name is still there, faintly etched, but next to it a small mark has been added, an asterisk. It doesn't link to a footnote, it just means he loved.